two, three. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back. Oh, it's root for the Cubbies. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Hey!
This is
the Monday Morning Quarterback on the 11th of February 2019 from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. Had an exciting weekend going forward there and a week coming up there, and we'll update you to some of the happenings here. Of course, Elizabeth Warren is now on the campaign trail. She started out in Lawrence, historic city, a workers' struggle there, women's struggle in the factory. There was childhood labor violations there. Well, they weren't violations. That was the norm at that particular time. We'll have a special program on Elizabeth Warren as she moves forward with her struggle. She's one of the candidates that does have a track record. She was the one literally that put together the Consumer Protection Agency, and thus she has a right to go around and tell workers about what she has done. She has a track record. She is not, as they say, the senator for little things. She's the senator for big things, and the ruling class is scared as hell of Elizabeth Warren. We had another announcement over the weekend on the bank of the Mississippi River, which runs all the way from northern Minnesota, where you can walk across it down to the Gulf in New Orleans, the Big Easy, and stops in between. Amy Klobuchar, the senior senator from Minnesota, announced that she's running for president. Her site is Amy for America. You can go and check that out. Amy Klobuchar has been in the Senate now. She's working on her third term. So she's been there 12 years, and if she completes this term or not, she would have had 18 years in the Senate. She is a moderate politician. The local newspaper, the Tribune, called her pragmatic. Will this type of pragmatism work? Well, we've seen some polling around that perhaps it would. Joe Biden is very similar there. The difference is, however, Joe Biden is a lunchbox. Biden out of Scranton, Pennsylvania, is a household name. And you have several of those, so he'll have organization laid for him in Iowa, in New Hampshire, and so forth and so on. Whereas Elizabeth Warren will also have her people in Iowa. And Bernie Sanders, the master of it all, he has organization in Iowa and in New Hampshire and in New England. He's been through California. He's ran for president before. And Joe Biden sort of stuck his feet in the proverbial water, and it was a shallow stream, as LBJ would say. But he was the vice president under Barack Obama, so he is well known, and he is ahead in the polls. Now, these other preliminary candidates out there, you have many of them that represent different types of interests. Twitter King Booker, who got dethroned by DJ Trump, represents the banking industry. Kamala Harris represents some corporate interests there. She comes out of Oakland. She was a former prosecutor in Oakland, some would say a persecutor, as was Amy Klobuchar. And at the time, the Klobuchar was the prosecutor in the largest county in Minnesota. That was a lock-em-up, law and order thing. Vice President Biden has apologized for his role in the lock-em-up, which fell upon disproportionately African Americans. There's no doubt about that. And other similarities there also from what state these people come. Joe Biden is, of course, from Delaware, and he knows the fathers of O.J. Simpson well, and so does some of the other candidates out there. Now, Booker, of course, was in the urban ghetto of Newark when he was there. He lives there, as I understand it now. He lived in a housing project. He came out of suburban Jersey. And so there's a bunch of these candidates out there. Bernie Sanders, a man literally got his head knocked on behalf of African Americans in Chicago. He went to the University of Chicago. There was a comment by the hero John Lewis that he'd never seen Bernie at a civil rights march. Well, John Lewis was down by and large around cotton fields in the South, marching there, getting his head knocked in. Bernie was in Chicago, dealing with the Chicago PD for Congress of Racial Equality. So there was a different situation there when it came out. The same corporate media that is trying to slander Elizabeth Warren on this Native American situation. She is from the very red state of Oklahoma, and I was talking to a lady was last week before last about that, and what the local European population and how they held values. Many of them heard stories, and they can place relatives that were in some of these tribes. Now, they may or may not be actually on the tribal rolls, but a belief is a belief is a belief there, and of course that is one of the things. But again, that is a side issue. Who cares? The chief of the Cherokee Nation is only 1/33rd. That's not a hell of a lot there, and he's the chief of the nation, and he looks like Elizabeth Warren. So again, you can't. You're dealing with a different denominator there. Elizabeth Warren has been on good work. She's challenging the banks now, and that's all that the voters need to know. Another headline came out of Huff and Puff Post over the weekend that Amy Klobuchar had been mean to her staff. Well, I don't know if Amy Klobuchar is mean, if she's a tyrant. I've never worked for Amy Klobuchar. If she's writing little tardy slips on there or not, if Harry Reid had anything to say to Amy Klobuchar, the body politic will deal with all of that. The voters will look at her program. Is it for the American people? Do they agree with it or they don't agree with it? And that'll be up to how her campaign staff projects her. Supposedly she'll go to Wisconsin, and this is one of the situations there. The Great Lakes at Lake Superior borders Wisconsin. Also, you can go over to Michigan. So all of that Midwest will be places where she'd go. And down to Mississippi, driving down, I-35, I believe. There's it. Anyway, I was going to say Route 66, but Route 66 goes to Los Angeles. Anyway, and that's through Chicago. Missed it a bit there. Missed all of Iowa. But the situation is they're very close in proximity. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of people from Minnesota that came to Iowa to bang doors, etc., canvass for Barack Obama. So they will do the same thing for her in any of those states into Wisconsin. Wisconsin used to be a very important primary at one time. It's not so much anymore. And Michigan's primary is still there. So she'll get her share to vote there. And this is what it's all about. We're cutting up like a pie. We are slicing and dicing into a cake. All of these people have their constituencies. It's just some of their constituencies overlap in the Democratic primary. There's some candidates are more pragmatic than others. Some don't have the voting records of others. And there are others that were not in the Congress, period. They were governors. Totally different situation there. Kamala Harris has arrived there late out of Oakland, but before that she was the Attorney General of California. So she's primarily been tied up with law enforcement for a very, very long time. I believe Klobuchar was the state's attorney for like about 8 years or something like that before she moved on to the Senate. But she went literally from being a person putting up highway signs to Yale University and on to the University of Chicago Law School and into private practice, and from there into government service, so to speak, and she's been there ever since. But that is her record. She will have to run on what record she has and her ability to do retail politics. There's no doubt she understands how to do retail politics out in the rural areas, around feedlots, corn stalks, etc., and that is what Iowa is all about. And small towns. She understands that, and that is what New Hampshire is all about. And I'm not sure what she'll be doing in South Carolina, but all the rest of these birds are trying to stake that particular situation. I would advise her to go west, young lady. Go west, go to California. Get some sun rays in. Better than going to Florida. That's a hellhole in Florida there. Bunch of criminals on every corner down there, H. Anyway, basically, that is where they're up. Now, tomorrow night will be Beto O'Rourke's night. DJ Trump later today is going to El Paso, Texas, the hometown of Beto O'Rourke. Beto O'Rourke will be speaking at a community event there, and the whole contention there is about this wall, and most people know, at least in El Paso, and have been to El Paso several times, that it borders Juarez, and thus there's a nice gate there where you can just cross daily. I lived in Juarez at one time, liked it over there. It's changed, obviously, but that is ground zero, and the cameras will be on Beto O'Rourke. Now, Beto O'Rourke has to be of this particular bunch of candidates, that at least the ones have come out. Now, there's some that, like the mayor out of South Bend, I haven't really heard him speak at all. But he is the best speaker. And he's very good at small groups. And he represents a Latino district. And he also seems to relate to followers of O.J. Simpson. And he relates to the working class. And that's the same thing with Bernie Sanders. The relation with Bernie, because our polls, and our polls are reliable, that had Bernie been the Democratic nominee in 2016, he would be in the White House now and not DJ Trump. So there are all kinds of rumors out there that, time has passed Bernie by. They said the same thing about Jesse Jackson. And Jesse, with Parkinson's disease and all, is still going strong. They said that at the time of Ferguson. Well, many of the leaders of the Ferguson campaign are either laying low, some, and now there were some in Ferguson that were out there with Al Sharpton before the hand. They're still working. And others are also working there in Ferguson and in Missouri. Now we have an African American that is the state's attorney in St. Louis. So, I mean, there are things that happen here. So this whole campaign season is very, very, very young, and people are staking out things. Twitter King Booker, I was saying that like Tweety Pie, but any Twitter King Booker was in South Carolina, and Kamala Harris was there also. Harris has a base. She's a graduate of Howard University, a historic African-American university. Some people said she had a problem with the followers of O.J. Simpson. Absolutely ludicrous and kooky. There's no statistical situation to bear that out. Her problem is a corporate problem. But once again, the situation is the way that the primary season is set up. It's going to be fast-paced. Leave the cornfields of Iowa, go to New Hampshire, and then there's, I believe, on to Nevada and South Carolina, and that'll get you about the Super Tuesday, and you go visit California, Beto O'Rourke's, I believe, Texas, and some more of those large states, which means you'll not only have to have organization, but you'll have to have money. and a hell of a lot of money to move through these primary states. So how these people navigate, it will be up to their general staff. So they're hiring up the so-called talent. My advice to them is be very, very careful about hiring up some of this talent that was older talent, particularly people that were connected with Hillary the Monster Clinton's campaign. Let me go to E.J. Dion here. Our liberal, his article, he's writing in the Washington Post. Trump's war on socialism will fail. That's interesting from E.J. But anyway, he goes on to say, we socialists are trying to save capitalism, and the damn capitalists won't let us. This was political scientist Mason Williams cited this cheeky but articulate comment by New Deal lawyer Jerome Frank to make a point easily lost in the news media on socialism that DJ Trump has launched the attack, of the war. Socialism goes back a long ways, yes, to Eugene Debs, and before it has taken a dose to keep the market alive. Dosage. Going back to the 19th century, Americans and European socialists and liberal reformers, well, social democrats, anyway, won't get into all that, worked together to humanize the system, working to and find creative ways to solve problems capitalism alone couldn't handle. This has been well documented in separate books written by historians, and he cites here Daniel Rogers and James T. Koplingberg. The New Deal, Rogers wrote, was a great explosive release of the agenda of the progressive past. Think about this when pondering the Green New Deal put forward last week by Senator Markey of the Commonwealth and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It's sweeping and adventurous. There is virtually no way it will become law as long as Republicans control the Senate and Trump is the president. And if something like it eventually does get enacted, there will be many compromises and rewrites, no doubt. But there would be no social reforms, even if those seeking change were too timid to go to the bigger and allow cries of socialism to intimidate them. In the State of the Union last week, Trump himself as the hiatus at the bridge, standing against the Red Menace. We renew our resolve that America will never be a socialist country. Yet, in referring to new calls to adopt socialism in our country, he points out open advocacy of socialism is now a normal part of our political discourse. Ocasio-Cortez is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. Bernie Sanders, who won almost 12 million votes in 2016 presidential election, ran exclusively as a Democratic Socialist. Some recent polls even have Sanders running against Trump in a hypothetical matchup. We should be clear, if Trump's words are entirely about re-election politics, he wants to tar all Democrats as socialists and then define socialism as the antithetical to American values. Has nothing to do with American values. America was founded on liberty and independence, not government coercion, domination, or control. He declared, we were born free and we will stay free. Curtis Lee Greenwood. The singer. Anyway. Lee Greenwood. Anyway, by attacking socialism isn't the cakewalk it used to be in the Cold War. It was easy to frighten Americans with the S word because of the Union of Soviet Republics, USSR. Often a powerful example of oppression that state controlled all the means of production could unleash. That is silly. Anyway, the Soviet Union, however, has been dead for nearly 3 decades. China is a communist on paper, but widely on equal crony capitalism, dictatorship, and presses. Young Americans especially are far more likely to associate socialism with genuine social insurance states than with jackboots and the gulags. Sweden and Norway and Denmark are anything but frightening places. In 2018, PRI American Values Survey offered respondents two definitions of socialism. One described as a system of government provides citizens with health care, retirement support, and access to free education, essential description of social democracy. The other was a full Soviet dose, a situation which controls key parts of the economy, such as utilities, transportation, and communications. Well, the situation is in many states, the state, in fact, does control communications and utilities. In Los Angeles, you have a city-owned a water electrical situation, and in many, many cities. You might say that socialism is winning the brand war. 55% say socialism was about public benefits, while just 43% pick various versions that stress government domination. Americans age 18 to 29, for whom the Cold War memories are dim to non-existent, were even more inclined to define socialism as social democracy. 58% of them picked the soft opinion, 38% the hard opinion. And that is a lot by a misnomer. Oh, yes, and those tax increases that conservatives love to hate associated with socialism. The creepy kind of Fox News poll last week found 70% of Americans favor raising taxes on families with incomes over $10 million, which they'll never see. Trump still probably gets some traction with this attack on socialism, and progressives should remember that social democratic ideas associated with with fairness, expanding individual liberties to get health care and go to college, for example, are more popular than the restrictive choices. Needlessly, Jerome Frank was right. Those slurs as socialism really do have a good track record of making capitalism work better. That's called reforms. And more justly, the word is not now and in its democratic form, and never should have been an obscenity. Almost couldn't pronounce the word. Anyway, this is also from the Washington Post, so don't groan over those Amy Klobuchar stories. Democrats should welcome a tough primary. Well, they'll have maybe. The problem around this time is we earlier were talking about the primary, and the way is so fast-paced. It may not be as tough as you think it's going to be, because a lot of candidates, if they participate in Iowa and New Hampshire, and in South Carolina and Nevada, will start to run out of steam. Nonetheless, Amy Klobuchar announced she was running for the Democratic presidential nomination. One of Klobuchar's biggest strengths is her appeal to electability. Well, yeah, there's no doubt about that. There were a number of candidates that ran in red districts at the House of Representatives, and they had electability. But she's not a general. The primary, but not so liberal that Democrats would be skittish about running her in a general election. Klobuchar is a great candidate for the modern Democratic experience, possessing a strong winning record in a state that is set there. She's well to the left of the political center, and frankly, not a quote-unquote white man. Well, yeah, it's evident. Being perfect on paper doesn't always translate into being perfect in practice, no doubt about that. Klobuchar, like her competition for the nomination, is heading into a phase of the campaign, where reporters, analysts, opposition researchers, interest groups, and all kinds of bad actors will dig up the dirt on all the top candidates. In fact, that process has already started with Amy Klobuchar, as according to the Huffington Post and BuzzFeed. Former staffers recently said she had a history of humiliating and mistreating her team members. Well, she's a tyrant. It's not clear this news alone will sink. And this is interesting how this article is written. No, this will not sink Amy Klobuchar or anyone else. This is an opinion piece by David Byler, Byler. Anyway, at various points in 2012 cycle, a number of different candidates surged ahead of Mitt Romney. Well, Mitt Romney, that was a different situation right there. In their book, The Gamble, John Sides and Lynn Varick described this process as discovery, scrutiny, and decline. Well, Texas Perry and his rock, he looked good there, but Texas Perry had the rock. He was a sitting governor from a large state who arguably had a better record of conservative orthodoxy than Mitt Romney, who ran moderate to liberal. That was in the Commonwealth, but he changed actually to be a much more. This is Willard Mitt Romney, a more conservative candidate than Ronald Reagan. Opposing such measures was heartless. He signed a bill letting undocumented immigrants in while he was in Texas. So the plausible other candidates were less plausible nominees than Texas Perry and Romney, but also illustrates how the harsh light of scrutiny can shovel a reputation. The pizza mogul Herman King, incidentally, they were talking about putting him on the Federal Reserve after a good straw poll. They helped debut performance, but fell when multiple women accused him of sexual harassment. Former House Speaker Newt Gingrich signaled after he fell, but his opponents managed to knock him down after talking about his personal flaws. Oh well. Newt wasn't going anywhere anyway. Joe Biden faced a plagiarism scandal. That was back in 1987. Gary Hart. Well, anyway, they've forgotten about that and forgiven Joe a long time ago. These extramarital affairs. Well, that was with Bill Clinton there. Now Ralph Northam shouldn't have been in the article here. These stories, like the Huff and Puff and BuzzFeed reports, might irk Klobuchar fans, but anyone who is rooting for Democratic candidates to beat DJ Trump ought to be in favor of a long and tough primary. Well, a long primary, but not a tough primary, because the problem is these candidates are bunched up so closely together. And the way the Democratic rules were at least set up to shut out Bernie Sanders, because of the way that in New York, that if you were an independent, you were shut out of voting for Bernie. This will be a little bit different replay here. In 2016, Republicans focused less on each other, consolidated behind a strong non-Trump candidate. Didn't work. He knocked them down like dominoes. It's way too early to know whether Klobuchar will share the fate of the other candidates. Well, it is way too early, I agree, to even be talking about it. Let's get back here to Americans and their tax returns. This is refunds, not tax cuts. Most recent tax cuts, but their refunds won't necessarily be the same, because the IRS has changed their methods. Peter Pugh, he's from Irving Township in Jersey, was irate when he completed his 2018 tax return this month and discovered his refund would be $3,000 less. He's a 39-year-old manager of a Barnes & Noble store. His wife works for the state of New Jersey. I still did get a refund, but compared to what I was expecting from the previous year. It was a shock. The average refund, incidentally, is down 8% at $170 this year compared to last. As the IRS reported that. We'll get into that in a minute. Things definitely have changed. Early data can shift a lot, tax experts say, but the reason to believe the frustrations could rise as more Americans complete their returns. The GEO warned last summer that the number of filers who receive refunds are likely to drop from 2018. The IRS estimates about 4.6 million fewer filers will receive refunds this tax season. Another 4.6 filers are likely to owe money. The tax policy people said 80% of the filers received a tax cut. About 5% wound up paying more in taxes. Hope I said that right. Anyway, this commonly happens here. The IRS encouraged Americans to review their withholding levels last year, but few did. About 75% of the filers received refunds in recent years. Many Americans appear to like getting a refund because they feel they received an extra $20 or $40 a week they could spend. But when you get a one-time tax refund of $1,000 to $2,000, they put forward paying off credit cards, etc. And they give some other examples here. But anyway, back to Pew. Appears to be hit by both factors affecting refunds this year. His overall tax bill is higher, and his withholding is likely to be a little bit lower. The family was affected by a new law, the $10,000 gap on state and local taxes, property taxes, state and local income taxes. He said in the past he normally deducted twice the amount, and so that's what happened to him right there. Let's just look at some filing statistics here. I had not looked at this before. Individual tax returns. And let's see if we can get to this. Probably didn't. Well, refunds. Yeah. 12,500,000,000 was the amount in 2018. 2019, it will be 8,713,000,000. And the average refund in 2018 was $2,036. It'll be $1,865. So those are some. We'll go ahead and attach this. Now let me just go back through this and make sure I got everything here. Oh, in the Virginia, well, Virginia Democrats float the impeachment situation there. I heard some interviews by a fellow that's still around, the rewrite on the Commonwealth of Virginia's Constitution, and his opinion was this did not cover Mr. What is his name? Fairfax. Justin Fairfax. Norton says he's not going to resign. There was another lady I heard on a deal said she was around with Norton, and he rarely mentioned African Americans. Now he's going to be, as they say, the great savior. The possible ability of all three of resigning raises the prospects of Democrats losing the governorship to a Republican Speaker of the House, who is next in line of recession. So they're going to have succession. Excuse me. They think it's a recession, no doubt about that. Meanwhile, state Democratic House Delegate Patrick Hope has said he will introduce the articles of impeachment unless he resigns. Well, they can have some hearings. Fairfax has called for the FBI to investigate. They said he didn't have jurisdiction. Well, again, these are situations sometimes that we look at. So again, I don't have the polling here. If I have opportunity, we'll look at some of the polling and where we are. Let me get the NBA scores up here so we can get those done. And in the interim, we'll go to college basketball, and let's see, we probably can do and see where we are right quick here. Okay, this would be men's basketball. This is men's college basketball, and it'll take a while to give these scores. I mean, it gets more every day here. Okay. We had hoped to give, and we'll put this in the Amy Klobuchar special here, from Nate Silver and his shop, where things are going. Let me just look at this polling. I just want to kind of get this a little bit up to date here in terms of where some of the polling at least looked. And this is not up to date polling, incidentally. This is polling from a few days ago. We kind of get a little idea of where we are. This would be on the 4th. This is back there. But then there's a mama poll here. Biden was at 29%. Bernie Sanders at 16%. Harris at 11%. And this Beto O'Rourke was at 7%. Warren was at 8%. Bloomberg was at 4%. Twitter King Booker at 4%. And some of these, and Klobuchar was at 2% with Gillibrand. That was in that particular poll. And let me go down. This is Emerson College out of Boston. They again Biden, Joe Biden at 29% here. Bernie Sanders at his 15%. Harris was ahead by 3 points at 18%. Warren had 11%. Beto O'Rourke had 6%. Twitter King Booker had 4%, and Amy Klobuchar gets her 3%. And they have some matchups here, hypothetical matchups against DJ Trump. DJ Trump would lead Harris by 6%, Warren by 4%. Biden would lead DJ Trump at 2%. Bernie Sanders would have a 1-point disadvantage. They had DJ Trump by 1% in that matchup. Beto O'Rourke, at this point in time, Trump would lead him by 6 points. Gillibrand by 8 points. Brown, well, I don't know, he's not even in here yet, by 9, and he would get a 9-point advantage if this is DJ Trump, if it were a Warren matchup and a Schultz matchup, and he's pulling 11. Now this was on the 2nd, and it's back to January 30th here. This was Politico's poll. It had Biden up by 33. Sanders stays at 15. Harris behind. Beto O'Rourke had 5. Warren had 6. Amy Klobuchar had 1, so she's up by 1 point. And in their matchups, this is the Detroit matchup. This is Michigan. Biden is ahead by 12 over DJ Trump. Warren is ahead by 3. Harris is ahead by 5. Bernie Sanders by 11. That's in the state of Michigan. Let's get to the NBA scores here. The Trailblazers were in Dallas. Mavericks 102 to 101. The Lakers were at the 76ers in Philadelphia. 76ers 143 to 120. The Suns were at the Kings. Kings 117 to 114 over the Suns. The Magic were in Atlanta. The Magic 124 to 108. And finally, the Heat were at the Warriors. The Warriors 122 118. And I guess we'll just give the NHL while we're here. It's we usually give them last. Nonetheless, the Blues were at the Predators in an overtime game. It was the Blues 5-4. The Avalanche were at the Bruins. The Bruins 2-1 in overtime there. The Jets of Winnipeg and the Sabres, it was the Jets 3-1. The Hurricanes and Devils, it was the Devils 3-2. The Wild and the Islanders 2-1 in that contest. The Red Wings and Blackhawks in Chicago. Blackhawks 5-2. The Lightning and Panthers, it was Lightning 5-2. And finally, the Maple Leafs and Rangers 4-1 in that contest. On to college basketball on the men's side. Just 2 games. We went to the University of Cincinnati and Houston. It was Houston 65-58. And Northwestern Iowa 80-79. 1-point game there. And on to women's basketball. This was on a Sunday. Louisville 72-63 over Virginia Tech, the Oregon Ducks, and Stanford, the Ducks 88-48. Florida State and Notre Dame. It was Notre Dame 97-70. Tennessee and Mississippi State 91-63. Mississippi State. Oregon State and California, the Bears, the Golden Bears. Oregon State 82-74. Villanova and Marquette. It was Marquette 93-55. Maryland and Rutgers. Maryland 62-48. Boston College and Syracuse. It was Syracuse 96-69. Iowa and Ohio State. Iowa 78-52. And UCLA and Utah. UCLA 100-90. And finally, University of Miami and Pittsburgh. It was Miami 65-51. I think we got everyone in here finally. Thus, we'll do it for the Monday morning quarterback. This is Boston Red from the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth. Have a good week, everyone. And we'll get those special programs up. Elizabeth Warren in Lawrence, Massachusetts. And Amy Klobuchar on the banks of the Mississippi in the cold, in the snow. And what more can we say about that? We also have an open source report coming up here. Got a little behind, but we'll get caught up.